That's Beyonce. Good song for this. Our series Common Ground highlights people who are setting aside partisan differences and solving problems. On Friday, the Justice Department announced the release of more than 3,000 federal inmates as a result of the First Step Act. Now, that's the bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that President Trump signed into law last December. Former Arizona Senator and CBS News contributor Jeff Flake recently met with two former colleagues, that's Senator Cory Booker there on your left and Senator Mike Lee on your right, to discuss the groundbreaking legislation. So, Jeff, this was a bipartisan achievement, so it is possible.
It is.
It is possible.
It sure is. Good morning. For the first time in over a decade, Republicans and Democrats came together to enact common sense reforms that are intended to make our criminal justice system more fair. I was a proud co-sponsor of the First Step Act, which begins to tackle our nation's mass incarceration crisis. And for those who benefit, it's nothing less than a second chance.
Well, it's an overwhelming feeling, and I'm just glad to be free.
Eric Balcom has waited 16 years for this moment. His first breaths of freedom after being released from federal prison in Jessup, Georgia.
I can't be bitter about all that I've missed. Come on, pick you up. I just gotta be thankful and grateful for the new memories that I can make. Yes.
New memories with his family.
God is good.
Including his daughter, Terica. Ironically, she's a corrections officer in Florida.
Just want you to be all right, Mom.
I'm all right.
There, Balcom reunites with his mother, who's suffering from dementia.
I just have to try to make the best out of the time she have left.
In 2003, when he was 29 years old, Eric Balcom was sentenced to life in prison. The crime? Selling 93.2 grams of crack.
When they say life, it's like somebody could have committed a murder in 2003 and been home before I did.
Balcom had prior offenses, including violent ones. But in prison, he said he rehabilitated himself, taking more than 60 courses, working, and even serving as a suicide companion.
Yeah, slow down, TJ. Make sure you don't run into nobody.
He's free because of the First Step Act, a law that reverses the harsh sentencing of the war on drugs era of the 1980s and 90s.
This is a cancer. This problem is a cancer on the soul of our country.
Democratic New Jersey Senator Cory Booker and Republican Utah Senator Mike Lee spent months negotiating the bipartisan bill.
Senator Lee, you're a conservative senator from a conservative state, Utah, also a former prosecutor, some would say an unlikely champion of criminal justice reform. Why are you interested in this issue?
I'm interested in this, not in spite of, but because of the fact that I'm a conservative and a former prosecutor. As a former prosecutor, I saw a number of abuses of federal law. I saw a young man named Weldon Angelos get sentenced to 55 years in prison for selling 3 dime bags of pot over a 72-hour period. That's just wrong. The judge sentencing him at the time said, this is wrong and only Congress can fix this problem.
Senator Booker, take us behind the scenes to the negotiations.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that relationships matter. Sometimes they surprise you, like the fact that I'm sitting next to a guy from Utah, not the most diverse state, for him to have a sincere concern that we have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850 and understand the racial dynamics here. So he and I had a real friendship, and it made for a good foundation.
A foundation that Jared Kushner, President Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, built upon.
Jared was a solid ally and one without whom we probably couldn't have gotten this passed.
Was there a moment when you thought it might all fall apart?
In the midst of the Kavanaugh hearings, which you know how hardening that was along partisan lines, I still remember getting on the phone with Jared, and he and I being at an impasse, and me being, angry and having my back up and ready to upend tables over a provision of the bill. And Jared saying, okay, well, let's conference in Lindsey Graham. And this is at a moment where people on my side of the aisle were not quite happy with Lindsey Graham, to put it mildly. And I still remember Lindsey getting on the phone and being very hard at Jared, saying, we can't do this without Cory. We need to keep this coalition together.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
What can you say to people like Eric and others who have been released under this program?
I mean, there is an anguish in my community. There's an anguish in African American communities. 90% of the people being liberated right now are African Americans. We live in a nation where our criminal justice system is still deeply biased against low-income people, against minorities, and this was a step.
I just want to tell you that I'm sorry.
a step that gave Eric Balcom the opportunity to finally apologize to his son.
I ain't gonna leave you like that.
For Balcom, it's just another step on the long road to redemption.
Boy.
Sadly, Eric Balcom's mother passed away just a few weeks ago. He's obviously in pain, but grateful to have had time with his mom as a free man.
Yeah, it's irreplaceable.
And that scene with his son, too, Senators.
Yeah, you know, for decades there's been
Gratifying.
talk about prison reform. What was different this time at the federal level? And also, is there any chance that states get on board? Because most prisoners are, in fact, in state penitentiaries.
You know, the interesting thing is some of the states have moved ahead, and that provided a lot of impetus for the federal government to move ahead. Texas in particular. Several years ago, a lot of people came together for very different reasons. Some didn't want to build more prisons. They were building 2 or 3 a year. Some wanted to have, less recidivism, and to use, the faith community wanted to get involved. For whatever reason, they all came together. 8 years later, they've closed a couple of prisons. Recidivism is down, the crime rate is down. And so at the federal level, we looked at that and thought, it works.
Yeah.
So some of the states have moved ahead gratefully, but I can't tell you what a partisan environment we were in December.
Yes.
And still, for the Congress to come together on an issue like this says something.
Does indeed. Very powerful reporting, Senator.
It says that it's
Very good.
possible.
Yeah.
There's so many issues that we need to follow suit on.
Right.
It's really
All right.
wonderful.